Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome Simon Taylor and John Surtees.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I've been lucky enough to make my hobby also my work for the last 50 years. And working in motor racing, I've met a lot of extraordinary people. But this man, it's an overworked word, unique, but this man is unique. We all know that he's the only man in history to have won the World Championship on 2 wheels and on 4. But if you delve behind that remarkable fact, you find some really astonishing statistics. For this is a man who in his life has had 3 careers. First, as a motorcycle racer. Right from his first race at 16, he was beating the established stars. He was 500cc world champion for the first time when he was 22 years old. And he went on to win 6 more world championship titles. And he won the Isle of Man senior TT 4 times. Second career, as a racing driver, he became world champion for Ferrari in 1964. He won the first Can-Am series, and he brought Honda into Formula One, winning them a crucial first ever Grand Prix victory. So that's the second career. Then there's a third career, as a Formula One team boss and as a racing car manufacturer. He built his own Surtees cars for Formula One, Formula 5000 and Formula 2. And he employed drivers like Mike Hailwood, Derek Bell, Jochen Mass, Tim Schenker, Vittorio Brambilla. In fact, I just totted up how many Surtees cars were built during the 1970s, and it was something like 100 single seaters. And John's just reminded me that he did all of that on 37 staff.
That's right.
Well, John, we could talk to you for days, for weeks, for months about your extraordinary life. All we can do this evening is paint a brief overall picture of just some of your achievements. I'm going to start off asking you some questions, and then, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to throw the floor open to you so that you can ask your questions of John. There'll be a radio mic coming around later, so think of your favourite questions, and if I don't ask it, then it's down to you. I want to start, John, by asking about how you can be a winner on 2 wheels and on 4. We've had other racing drivers going back to Nuvolarian before, who've raced bikes and then raced cars. You're the only man that actually got to the top in both disciplines. How different was the technique for you racing on 2 wheels and 4? Were you using the same abilities or different ones?
I think so. I think in those days we didn't have computers to come along and help us out so much. It was a case of where, with the seat of your pants and the tip of your fingers and everything else, you related to a piece of machinery. And this meant that you created a close affinity with that machinery where it had to talk to you. And this is what happened in my very first race of mine, which I won. It wasn't the first race, but the first race I won, which was on the Vincent, like a great flash.
There it is.
Down there in Aberdare, Wales. And on that day, suddenly, I came together, and it was talking to me. And that stood me in good stead. And so when Reg Parnell and Tony Vanderbilt, when I was at a Sportsman of the Year contest, luncheon, at the end of Mike Hawthorne, who was also on the table, his championship year, which was 1958, 1958, in Park Lane, when they asked me, they said, in fact Mike asked me, John, ever tried a car? They stand up easier. And with that, Tony Vanderbilt piped up and said, if he drives a car, remember, Tony Vanderbilt had just retired from racing, if he drives a car, he's a motorcyclist, I'm a motorcyclist, he drives a van wheel. Reg Parnell said, oh, didn't say much, but Reg Parnell a week later was on the phone saying, can you come down to Goodwood? I've got a DBR1, the one Sterling won the Nürburgring race with. We've got certain delicate things about it which we want to recheck. What it was is David Brown, who of course was a gearbox manufacturer, and what wasn't known at the time is that they had fitted a Maserati gearbox in that car. And so I went down and I tried it. First time I'd really seen a racing car. I'd been so totally involved in two. I think it felt rather like DBR1, a fabulous car. It's quite nice. And then I stopped and he registered, John, formality, can you sign this? I said, what's that? He said, a contract. I said, no, I'm a motorcyclist. And so that's where it started. And of course, the next day, or that night, Tony Vanderbilt came on. I said, you've been testing for, he didn't have a high opinion of David Brown. So I won't say what he said. So he said, David York is getting the van walls out of mothballs and he's going to be at Goodwood, I think on Thursday it was. Be there. Why not? So I went along and there I was, instead of sitting on top of a Norton, I was sitting behind 4 Nortons because of course the engine had been built by the Norton engineers.
Yeah.
And so that's how I started.
Well, just before we leave the motorcycling, I just want to take you back. You, of course, started with Vincent's, then you were with Norton's, but you switched to the Italian firm MV Agusta. I think you wanted to win with British machinery, but you decided that you needed an Italian machine to win the World Championship.
Well, my first thoughts, Joe Craig, Joe Craig was a very famous person who'd been the sort of person behind most of Jeff Duke and the rest of them in the later stages of development of Nortons, both just before the war and after. And I spoke to him about this because he was going to retire, and in fact I was very pleased to win his last race for him, which was at Silverstone, and managed to beat Jeff Duke, who was on the Gilera. So that was rather a bonus for him and for me. But the next year they had 1 or 2 different circuits they'd introduced. This is for 56, and I thought, if we put a fairing on the Norton, it could be that we could compete. And I managed to drum up through a contact a bit of sponsorship from the News of the World. And I went to Norton's and said, can I have the Works machines to do a World Championship with? I got the Works machines and the Edwards brothers, who were the chief mechanic in the other. I said, and we can pay something towards it, obviously. And Gilbert Smith said, Surtees, I'll have to put it to the board. He put it to the board. He said, I'll put it to the board. Yes, we agree with you. You could, we think, but we can't do it. If you won, you would earn more than a director of this company. Why did the British motorcycle industry die?
Well, you had obviously enormous success with MV Agusta, won the World Championship titles. I must just ask you about the Isle of Man TT, that extraordinary circuit. You won, I think, 4 senior TTs. You also won on a 350 as well.
There are 3 juniors. Yes.
Yeah. So, just in a short paragraph, can you decide what it's like racing flat out over that extraordinary
37
track.
and a half miles.
Yeah. Of public road.
Lifting your head up to miss lampposts, making certain where you could put your wheels in the gutter, in the places you could put your wheels in the gutter to get more power on, and making certain that where you didn't go into the gutter because there's a drain hole. All these things are all the skills you have to learn for something like that. Mind you, one year I didn't envisage what I was going to have as a challenge, and that was in early morning practice. I came through a section and came out up to a place called the schoolhouse, coming out of a wooded section, up a right-hander, pretty well out. And what was I confronted with? A cow came over the fence. And my envy, Augusta and everything, with all brakes on, we boom.
You hit the car.
Hit the cow. Bike went down the road, cow rolled over. The cow got up. Luckily I got up, but the bike had shoveled up gravel into the carburetor, etc. And so I was left to use the spare bike for the race. But that was an experience in the island.
One more motorcycle question I must ask you. I read somewhere that you won your final motorcycle victory only wearing one boot.
I suppose there's a double story there, because it also links in to my winning the Monza Grand Prix with the Honda in 1967.
Yeah. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a four-wheel Honda. We'll come on to that.
4 wheels, because very similar circumstances. What happened was that I came to the back straight and into to come along and brake for the last long curve, which is the I'm trying to remember
The Parabolica.
But
The Parabolica.
the Parabolica at the end corner there, which is a long right-hander. The first part starts and it widens out, and you sort of come in and then you let it drift out in order to drive down the straight and get the maximum speed down there. And somebody had blown up and left oil, and there hadn't been that much. And I came down there and I suddenly had a bit of a full lock. I went into it and I lost the back end, a full lock, and the only thing was to drive into it and go over the grass in those days, go over the grass, and I sort of just about got it by, and then turned it enough just to graze the bank, but I hit the bank hard enough, it actually tore my boot off. And so I ended up going to the finish line to win the race with one boot.
A great way to end your two-wheel career. Now, you've mentioned your talks with Reg Parnell and with Tony Vandervelde, but in fact, your first Grand Prix were for Colin Chapman at Lotus, and you actually finished second in the British Grand Prix, your second ever Grand Prix. And we all thought at the time, I mean, I was sitting at the back of the fourth form maths lessons at the time, but I thought too, that you were going to be the number one driver at Lotus in 1961.
There's a story there.
Somehow you and Chapman failed to agree. Well, what went wrong there?
No, we didn't really fall out. No, I mean, it's what might have been in many ways, because we go along and one of the things what got away was I could have taken Lotus their first ever Grand Prix win with the Portuguese Grand Prix, which I think was either just after or just before,
Just after,
the British Grand Prix, because I had a 20-second lead, and I was still motorcycling, and so I wasn't a total car driver. I was a part-time car driver, and I was still motorcycling, and the concentration which was required was so much. And I came across Sterling, And Sterling had had a pit stop, and because I'd passed him early on before that, but when we'd had been at the start, but he had a pit stop, and I came across Sterling. And the worst thing I could do was to actually, follow someone. I needed to do it all in my own way. I needed to sort of be able to just concentrate. I didn't want to sort of be around someone. And so the long straight at Porto, which had tram lines in it, went into a fairly sharp left-hander. And so I came up behind Sterling and going down there, and I made a judgment that before going round to the back and through those fast sweeps all down past the sardine factories, which you knew clearly, you knew where you were just by even the car smell. This was something which, I don't know, and I made two mistakes. One, I decided to do it. Two, I didn't turn across the tram lines. Remember, we only had tyres about that wide in front, hard enough, so I got a little bit stuck, which delayed the turn-in. With the delay of the turn-in, secondly, when I went to brake a bit more, early on the saddle tank over the top of the chassis, aluminium tank sitting on the tubes of the chassis, had cracked, and my boots and everything else were covered in petrol, and so my foot slipped on the pedal a little bit, and so I lost the brakes for a minute, and I went back onto them. The first mistake I made was that, i.e. going across the tram lines. The second one, I should have just gone up a slip road and turned round. Instead, I went to turn round, I clipped the straw bell, and it knocked the water hose off. And that was the end of my first Grand Prix win.
And it would have been Lotus's first.
And Lotus's first.
Yeah,
and there we go. But Colin came in at the end here and said, "John, you're number one. And you've got choice of teammate." So I said to him, "Oh." He said, "But, obviously you've got to stop motorcycling. You can't, do all the year," because I'd only been able to do odd races. So I said, "Jimmy Clark."
You wanted Jimmy Clark as your teammate? Yeah.
I said, "Jimmy." I'd been racing against Jimmy, and I got on with Jimmy and everything else. And when I first did my tests with Lotus, I had a lot of anti-ness from
Innes Arndt.
Pardon?
From Innes Arndt.
Innes.
Yeah.
From Innes. And this, he was rather upset about this amateur coming in, because when I first tested the car, I'd gone there and I'd gone as fast as him in the car at Silverstone, but I'd also, at the end of the day, run it off into the bank. And he went berserk about, we haven't got any parts, and you get these amateurs drive cars, etc., etc. So that's it. Colin said, he's driving. Mind you, giving us his due, when he went to the actual race, and he hit one of the oil drums on Woodcote Corner, which of course in those days at Silverstone, you had the safety measures were water-filled oil drums around the inside of the corner. Just to make sure you knew where the corner was, and to make sure you didn't go off too far. So he hit one of those, and he said, "Oh, well, we all do it, don't we?" But when Colin asked me that, I gave it a reply. The next thing that happened was that, and I'd come in for a bit of stick from a lot of the establishment who didn't really appreciate this newcomer coming in and being in this sort of like top group. And this sort of made me a bit sensitive. I was too sensitive here, because the next thing is Innes was in France, and there was a phone call from Innes about stealing his drive, everything else. So no, look, I'm not getting involved in all this politics. Let's have a meeting. So we had a meeting with Colin, and Colin said, I fixed up Innes for you to drive for BRP. They're going to have the cars and etc. the same as we have, and everything else. And Colin said, Innes said, I've got a contract though, and this and that. And so I, for I think I was a bit too sensitive. I walked away. Yeah. I said, I don't want to know about this. I walked away, and I didn't have a drive.
Well, you did nevertheless stay. You were in Formula One the next year with the Yeoman Credit team, but I want to
Reg Parnell rang up
again.
Yeah.
But I want to fast forward to 1963, because you were still, in motor racing terms, almost a newcomer. But Enzo Ferrari came after you, and you signed for what was the greatest motor racing team in the world, Ferrari. Now, what was it like working with Ferrari, and particularly Enzo Ferrari?
We've got to remember there's two things happened in between, which are very important. One, he asked me the year earlier, and I'd gone out to Maranello, and I'd seen him and I'd seen Keaty, and I'd listened to what they were intending to do, and I saw all the list of drivers they had lined up, and I thought, where do I fit in as such? And I'm not really, I've been with Italian teams before, and I know that to a degree you needed to go there with strength, and being complete. I thought, I'm not complete enough. I'm not ready for this, so I turned it down, and I arranged for Yeoman Credit to support the build of a new Formula One car, which was a Lola. And of course, I got seconds in the Grand Prix with a Lola, and we finished in front of Ferrari in the World Championship. But when I turned down Ferrari, they said, we do not ask twice, you are finished. But they did.
They did. And of course they were right to do so, because you brought them the World Championship in 1964. But of course you'd had a sample of Italian inter-team politics when you rode for MV Agusta and scored those World Championships for them. And you won the World Championship for Ferrari, but you did have to grapple with inter-team politics, didn't you? And in the end, you decided to walk away from Ferrari in the middle of a season because you didn't like the way you were being treated.
In life, sometimes you look back on decisions you make and things that you make, and you say, if perhaps I was as wise as now, anything else, that decision back then in 1960 and that decision in 66 might have been a little different. By playing it differently. It would have been, but you know, I wasn't a player. I was just straightforward and just loved my racing and didn't want all this sort of intrigue. No, very difficult time for Ferrari developed, because they had these various people fighting for the company. Ford, and on the other side you had Fiat. And the company, as Ferrari said, when I sort of met him to a contract, he said, we haven't we haven't got much money. But there are other advantages. Those other advantages turned out to be staying at a 4-star hotel for 1,700 lira a day, all in, which was just about £1, and going around Modena, which is a lovely place with nice shops and some fantastic restaurants, gastronomic centre a little bit of Italy, and you walk in and say, Pilote Ferrari, Surtees, 50% discount. Yeah, 50% discount.
Although, just to interrupt on this particular, I remember you were able, while you drove a Ferrari, to drive around on the road in the most wonderful Ferrari 330 GT, but then they sent you a bill.
What?
They sent you a bill for your road-going Ferrari.
No, when I turned up in my 507 BMW, which I'd had. And the old man turned around and said, Macchina Tedesco! Ferrari! So I thought I'd been given one, as you said. I love the look of a Lusso, but then you were travelling to races and you had to put all your luggage in. So the GT looked to be the practical answer. So I spoke to Della Casa. So I spoke to Della Casa, who was basically an accountant and secretary, and said, yeah, okay, we'll fix you up one. And when I come to get the payments, what did I find? That invoice be at trade price. Incidentally, there was a strange little twist to that. I had a text from someone this week, saying, I found your Ferrari 330 GT without engine and gearbox, which Mr. Ferrari gave you.
Yeah.
I had to point out to him,
It seems to me that whatever team you went to in Formula One, your concentration on trying to get everything right, to develop the car so that you had the raw materials that you needed to win the race, it was that often brought you difficulties with the people who thought it was their job. You went into Ferrari and said, if we're going to win races, the car has got to be like that. And Dragoni, for one, didn't like that. He didn't like the fact that his drivers weren't doing as they were told.
Dragoni was another person. He was a perfume manufacturer, as such. Made a right stint in his job there, I think. And I think the main thing is he had good connections at Fiat, which is one of the things. He didn't know anything about motor racing really, although they had he had a sort of interest in a private team, and he was a political party who played games which there's no place for. Now when I went there, I was still learning, and I just went there, and my first job was being given the new prototype car. The prototype car had been a V6 rear engine car which had been used in the previous year, 1962, and they chopped the back chassis and then fitted a V12 in, and it was my job. So I went to Modena, and I just went round and round Modena with Fantuzzi, the panel beater there, beating the thing around as we put oil on it and wool tufts to do our aerodynamic testing to get the cars ready for Sebring. And so we worked like hell to get those cars going and get it working nice. It was sort of it's a nice little car. And there was going to be about 4 had to go to the race. There was one which was the last one off, which we didn't have time to test. but Ludovico Scaffiotti, who I was going to drive with, and myself, we'd said, oh, we're having this one, and we sorted it out. We get to Sebring, and one of the cars is given to the American team, Mr. Canetti, Mr. Canetti, for Rodriguez to drive. And they said, "This is your car." I said, "No, that's not my car." "Yes, you've done all the testing, so you know the car's best. This hasn't had much testing, so you better drive it." First problem. Then, of course, we go along, so I speak to Ludovico. I was going to walk out, and Ludovico said, "Please don't, please don't." I nearly walked out then, but please don't. So I didn't. I said, "No, we'll make it work." Well, in the race, we both suffered severe sickness because the bonnet, on a rear engine, but the bonnet lifted because it hadn't been given fitted with the other attachments, the sealing, and the fumes came over into the cockpit. Came over to the cockpit, and we were getting as sick as dogs. And we went along, and we went through the race, but we persevered, and we won the race. And promptly sick ladies were up there on the podium up there, us, and we were there, and arms around everything else. We had to break away from the podium and go around the back to be sick. And then we had a blow. Protest. You haven't won the race. And who had protested? Mr. Dragoni. He said that Rodriguez had won it. Luckily, my wife was a fantastic timekeeper and lap charter. And she sat there for the whole period and taken the whole chart.
12-hour race.
Yeah, and this coincided with the organisers' one. So the protest got thrown out. But it was purely a case of where he was trying to put his authority on a new boy.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the fears of some of the people was that Ferrari was very fond of people who've been associated with motorcycles. And so he rather got quite a nice little rapport going. Yeah. And so, and I think these people resented this.
They were jealous.
Yeah, they resented this, and they thought, we've got to make sure we say it. So that's a situation there.
Now we're going to come on to Honda, your Formula One time with Honda in a moment, but I just want to move sideways slightly to go into the Can-Am series. While you were racing in Formula One, you were also, of course, doing the big North American sports racing cars, the Can-Am cars. You won the first Can-Am series with a Lola in your team Surtees colours. But then the next year, you had a really dreadful accident which nearly killed you and very nearly certainly spelt the end of your career. Tell us about that accident.
Well, of course, the Lola thing came about partly because of Ferrari. I had a very good relationship with Eric, of course, but at Ferrari I was trying to get them to drum up. One of the problems was that here in Great Britain we were developing all these new teams, and the teams were piggybacking, and they were taking advances all the time. And on top of that, those teams had available to them the Coventry Climax engines. And the Coventry Climax engines were some of the first ones which actually had mid-range power. And so it was able to make the cars work better and more drivable. And so it was a formidable opposition, and they had to come along, whereas in Italy there was nobody. Maserati was you know, only dabbling with things. They didn't really have much to do at that stage. And Lancia, of course, had stopped. So there was this Fry. And I said, you've got to get a new technology. So I went to Lola's and I got the first of the fiberglass bodywork at Fry's by taking specialised mouldings out to Italy to set up to produce fiberglass bodywork, the same as they did for the Lolas.
But to move you on to the 67 accident, that's what I wanted to get to with the T70,
Yeah.
because that's such a dramatic story.
Well, yes, that's is a dramatic story, unfortunately. I got permission, although certain people said no, I got permission from Enzo. I said, look, I've got to keep in touch with other advances other than what you have here. I think we need to keep in touch with the English scene. And I like to work with Lola. He said, as long as you do not enter cars with another manufacturer, only under your name. And that's how Team Surtees was born. Well, we get to, of course, 65 when this happened, and I had, and the Can-Am was not really starting then. The Can-Am started the following year.
Right.
And we were doing some American races and Canadian races as well as English. And I'd gone out and I'd won in England at Silverstone and I think Oldham Park. And then Eric Broadley said, our American agent said, could you take 2 cars? Could you enter 2 cars? So I said, oh, well, yes, I think so. Can you build a second car? Yes. So the car was ready just before the Guards Trophy at Brands Hatch. And so I said, who are we going to get to drive it? He said, oh, Jackie Stewart. So I rang up Jackie and I said, we drive this and that. So after some haggling, he said he would, and he got permission from BRM because he was there. And I said to him, I said, look, you take my car. It's a winning car. This other car is going to be last minute, not tested, so it's far better I take it. They're both the same. I take it. Well, as it was, we got the car nicely sorted in practice, and I won the race. And that was that. Well, the following week, there was Mosspool. After the race, Jackie pronounced to me, I want that car. So what? Have that car. So I gave him that car. And we went off. But in practice, he hadn't been very happy with it. And so I said, right, I'll take it out. So I took it out, and I don't frankly know. But I know because of what I've told. What happened was that I came round the final right-hand corner. There's a straight, short straight in front of the pits, before it drops away into another long right-hander. As I went along to go into that right-hander after the pits, the car went off the track, somersaulted in the air and came down on me. And I was here, and I was taken into Scarborough General Hospital in Toronto, and I think I woke up a couple of days later because I'd had a ruptured kidney, and I'd been smashed at the bottom of my spine had been broken, and my pelvis, in fact, it was 4.5 inches pushed up at this side. And the old doctor came in and said about what had happened and the rest of it, and so that was there. And Rob Rushbrook, Lola, well, he was the one in charge of building the cars and everything else, came into the hospital and he said, "John, I'm so sorry." I said, "What happened?" He said, "I'm so sorry. It's our fault." What happened is that the American distributor was wanting to reduce the price of the cars by getting parts made in America. They had sent a set of parts to England for testing and evaluation. Unfortunately, some uprights, front suspension uprights, magnesium castings, where the core had moved, and so they were a bit wafer thin, instead of being left there for testing, got picked up and put onto the new car which was built. And so it shattered, and that's why the car went off. But the old team came back, because when, in a way, it all turns around. Once I was stabilised here, the old doctor, the old specialist came along and said, "We're not capable of really dealing with you here, with your problems, because your sort of physical problems are something which it's either England or America." Well, Tony Vanderbilt flew out, and he came to see me and he said, "Sterling St Thomas's, experiences, St Thomas's, Mr Urquhart, get him on the phone." So he got Mr Urquhart on the phone at St Thomas's Hospital, and he explained the situation to him, and Mr Urquhart said, "Don't let those Americans get their hands on him. They use a knife. Get him back here." So he booked out a British Overseas Airways plane, front seats. I was mummified onto a stretcher, so I didn't move too much, and I was carried on and lifted and put on the front seats and flown back to England, St Thomas's. And so that was where I came.
And you were racing again 5 months later?
Well, what happened, another little bit of story there, was that Mr Urquhart came in one day and said, "We've got to get you straight." He said, "You see my registrar? Big lad, isn't he? Plays rugby." He said, "We're going to take you downstairs into the cellars, put you on a table." He said, "He's going to get one end, I'm going to get the other." He said, "We're going to tug like hell and we'll get you near." And so they got me to, I think, 3/8 of an inch back.
Yeah, fantastic. Extraordinary. Now, there's so much more we could talk about, John, but I am going to now move you forward to your time with Honda. Honda had never been in four-wheel racing before, certainly on an international basis, except they've had the Richie Ginther car. Yeah. That's quite right. Nice to have you put me right. I'm sorry about that. You've got to get it right. But their big push in Formula One was in 1967. They came to you to do it, and they said, "We can't do it in Japan. It's too far away. We want to do it here in England." So you were pretty much put in charge not only of driving the car, but also overseeing the whole project.
It was actually a bit of a familiar story, a bit like Mr Augusto. Augusto and Enzo Ferrari And in some ways, there's various similarities with Mr. Honda. It came about because, you know, I could have so easily had the championship in 1966, having started off and won with Ferrari. We were right in there with the Cooper Maserati, working with my old teammate, Roy Salvadori, who was team manager. We got the Cooper Maserati, despite looking a cumbersome car, to be a very drivable car. And it was only stupid things which cost us a championship. A bag tank, Peter Arundel coming out the pits at the American Grand Prix and T-boning me when I'm sitting there in a nice position, that lost us the championship. But the last race, we got it right, and I won the Mexican Grand Prix.
Indeed, yeah.
Mr. Nakamura, the team manager, came along and said, "John, Honda will be out of racing unless you join us." And so why? He said, "We need someone like you, but also you had the team, so you can probably help us with some facilities, because we've got to have facilities in England." So I thought, well, the old motorcycling background, I must say, appealed. Thinking about well, if I could do it on a motorcycle, and I'd been very impressed by the little 1.5 litre. I thought the 3 litre looked a bit of a heavy, cumbersome boot, but just the same, I thought, Honda should be able to turn their mind to it. And I was, in a way, a bit homeless. I'd been looking to be part of a family. And at Ferrari, I started, in fact, I was just furnishing the flat that Enzo had asked me to move into because he wanted me to spend more time in Italy when I left them. So, in a way, I wanted a family again and be back and feel part of it. So I thought about it. I spoke to Roy. He said, "Oh, well, we're not sure. We're continuing. Maserati may not do any development work." So I flew out to Japan and went there, and they said, "We'd like to do this and do that, and we'd like you to tell us a few of the things." So they had a blackboard. They had a blackboard there, and the rest they said, when you went to they picked up on these things. When you went to Cooper Maserati, you made geometry changes with on the car, which showed up and things like this. What about it? They wanted me to go and get the chalk up, start writing on the board. This is R&D. So a new experience. I hadn't realised that just like Ferrari, they were going to come under such pressure financially.
Really?
And the budgets would be so cut. So then Mr. Nakamura said, "John, can you help us get any sponsorship?" So it ended up I started being driver, trying to find bits of sponsorship for them and also organising the team. But it was very good. And what's nice is that during my time, engineers we worked with all became presidents of Honda afterwards. And Kume, Kawamoto had been, apart from Mr. Honda, the great names of Honda during their successful years. And what was so nice also was that when they won at Brands Hatch with I think Mansell, Kume sent me, who was president, sent me a note those years later saying, "John, this wouldn't have been possible without you."
Now, we could continue for hours because we haven't even got on to...
I've talked too long.
You as the manufacturer. Well, it's not so much. Perhaps I've talked too long because I know that there are people in the room who would like to ask John some of the questions that I've got queuing up to ask. So somewhere Steve has a radio microphone, and he's very quick on his feet. So if you'd like to wave an arm at me, ladies and gentlemen, if you've got a question, and there's somebody right there, and we'll get a microphone to you, and you can ask our question. Yes, sir.
Keep it out of the way.
Testing. John, can we go back to Vincent and the Grey Flash, which I used to watch from that corner at Brands, and my father took me there because I think he did some of the engine machining for your father. So that's the first time I've got close to it, and the engineering is absolutely immaculate on it. Was that all done in the back of the shop at Forest Hill? And how many people worked on it?
Right, was it all done at Forest Hill?
No one. This is not all the original bike. This is part of it, because by the time I finished with Vincent, I had quite an accumulation of parts, particularly working there and getting the support of Mr. Vincent. The history of the original bike was that it was a test bike, which was in black, but it's a grey flash specification which had been given to Kings of Oxford, which was the largest motorcycle dealer in England, run by Mike Howard's father. And it was lying there, and I'd had a conrod going through the crankcase of my 250 Triumph, dropping me on my backside on Abbey Curve at Silverstone. And so that was the end of that. And we was down there, and so I said, what about trying one of these? And there was this bunch of bits in the corner, and Dad spoke to Mr. Vincent. He came along and said, yeah, we'll support him, and he can also try one of our new big ends, which was a plain bearing big end, an aluminium sleeve going in and a rod working straight on it. Try one of our new big ends as well. So have it. So it was given to me. Not given to me, we bought it. My dad put it on hire purchase, and because I was on £2.50 a week. £2.10, I should say. £2.10 a week, and living on Welsh Rabbit in between the days that I didn't go home. But I would use a road test machine to travel home, which was just in a place called Addington, Old Addington. It was, nowadays it would probably take you 3-4 hours. It used to take me an hour to nip home, because of course there was no traffic and there were no speed limits. And the old Vincent twins and that were quite quick. And so that was it. Go home, and I'd work into this little late hours and whistle off the next morning. And so I prepared them, and we'd stick them into Dad's van and go off to a race meet at the weekend. But I carried on. I drilled a few more holes and did a few other bits and pieces to it, and it was, yeah.
And there it is.
Yeah, and that one I rebuilt when I had to close my Formula One team because the sponsor reneged on us at the end of 1978. I was so disgusted that I just turned my back on four wheels for a while, and I turned back to my first love, motorcycles. And I went scavenging around all the bits that I still had from both myself and from my dad and the rest of it, because in those days, when you sort of finished the season, the material didn't have much value afterwards. And so I'd have had it around, and it had been stuck away in boxes. I got it all out, and I started to build it. And in fact, I'm still building one or two of the Nortons that I got parts for.
Right, we're going to ask for another question. Yeah, there's one right over there.
Good evening, John. Terrific evening this is for me, I'm sure for everybody else. I'd just like to ask you to throw a little bit of light on why the style of motorcycle racers in your time in the 50s and Jeff Duke, always they said how neat riders were. The best riders were always commended for their neatness. You watch racers today and they're hardly on the bike. What are the reasons for that?
A number of things. In my time with MV, there was quite a lot of development going on in the 50s in the rivalry between Avon and Dunlops. And you started to have high hysteresis compounds come in. And these were doing grips, and so you got more angle. One of the things is the MV was very wide, the engine, a bigger engine than the Gilera, and so it started to grind on the road. So one of the things I first started to do was to shift my weight, which was just in fact my bottom over to one side, and so I was accredited with starting a bit of that style, but not sticking my knee down. I hope no one's picked up on that photograph which is out there, which they put on certain people's websites, which goes along and shows a Vincent with a person on it. I can't imagine how bad they look. I can't imagine how, in fact, they can ride a bike that way, hanging totally off it with their knee on the ground and everything else, and looking a right mess. And they actually put my name to it. I must say, but so that was it. What happened is that largely it has been, this development came about by trying to keep a bigger patch of the tyre on the road. So keep a bigger contact patch on the road. So you shift your weight, and then took this to extremes. But if you notice, the real stars, although they sort of get down, they don't look too ungainly. It's the people who try and copy them which look so ungainly. Yeah. But now, of course, you've got a whole different world in motorcycling. Whereas my time, you'd be out there and on the edge, and you'd be starting to move away, and you would get drifting, and you'd be controlling it on your right hand, and when it started to move it, you'd be easing off. Now, of course, you're done. You go along and you wind the throttle on, and let the computer take over.
Yeah. Can we have another question? Yes, sir, right there.
In the middle.
Oh, okay, here.
I was just wondering, what was your favourite car that you've ever driven, and what car out of all of them are you driving now at the moment?
Sorry. Right, I didn't hear that too clearly.
What was the favourite car of all the cars you raced? And I think the subsidiary question was, what are you driving now?
Ah. My favourite car, I think all the cars and bikes that I rode, you create that relationship with. So you have a sort of relationship with all of them, and you have your highs and your lows. I must say that I have a great affection in a way for that first Formula One car I sat in and raced and actually raced with Colin. I like Colin. He was a character, a bit difficult perhaps in some ways, but I like Colin, and of course a brilliant man. And that Lotus 18 may have been a bit fragile and everything else, but it was a fantastic motor car. Then you come along and the P Ferraris, the P cars, I drove at the Sebrings and Nürburgrings, the Monzas and Spas and places. They were really drivable cars. You know,
Those were the sports racing for
the
us.
sports racing cars. These were the prototypes.
Sure.
Those ones there. You went along and Nürburgring, you go along a Flugplatz and you come along, you go and take off, and you'd be pretty sure you'd get them down straight and the rest of it. And they were good cars to drive. They gave a lot of pleasure.
I think also the car on your right here, has a particular place in your heart. This is the Formula 2 Surtees, ladies and gentlemen, and if you didn't look at it coming in, take a close look at it as you leave, because that is a Formula 2 Surtees which has played an important role in your life.
Well, yes, I guess so each of the cars there, and of course I had the 64 Ferrari over, which obviously has to be a special because I've got my championship in it and things. Grecs are the 68 Honda. You know, apart from the stupidity of things, a bit like, which was often pure mistakes on the parts of people who had experienced. Again, we had the opportunity of bringing the first World Championship to Honda because the car actually worked very well despite its weight. But back to the Formula 2, I brought that along purposely tonight because you got there the start really of my career, which is Vincent, and you got the end of my motorcycle career, which is the end of the Augusta, and you got basically the end of my car career, which was when I was running my team, acting as driver, but mainly for test purposes, and we built the Formula 2 car for the first year in '72 and got Matchbox sponsorship, competing against a certain Ron Dennis, which was rather nice. I was sitting down there when he came down the steps from the office, having had his interview first at Matchbox, and so we got their support. And we built that little car with Hart forward engines. What was good about the year was Mike Howard came along and won the European Championship. I won the Gold Cup with that car at Imola with that particular car, and also with that particular car the first Japanese Grand Prix that was held was at Mount Fuji, and that was very pleasing. Other something which is particularly special for me is it is the only car that my son drove of our manufacturer, and he drove it 1 week before he was killed, and set up a time going up Goodwood Hill, which if the times had been announced, because they didn't show them, but I had data system on the car, would have put him up somewhere in the front of the Formula Ones. So it's very special, and the little team there, and Mike and the rest of it was good.
It's wonderful that you brought it. Can we have another question, please? Yes, there's one right over there. Yes, sir. Can you get a microphone to you? If not, why don't you just stand up and shout? I think you can probably hear.
I'll try to shout. Can you hear me?
Here comes the microphone.
I'm going to lose weight by the end of the year.
John, my favourite sports car from the mid-60s was your old red Lola T70. I think it's still around. I saw it at, or one that was at least a replica of it at Goodwood members meeting a couple of months ago. Apart from the obvious exception of your crash, how much fun was that car to drive?
The Lola?
Yeah.
270. Oh, the Lola, it was partly my baby, because we're together with Eric and Rob Rushbrook and the little team at Lola, you know, who came along and took it. And I went to Traco and got Chevrolet, some iron block at that time, Chevrolet engines, and put it together and went out and tested it. So, no, they're great cars to drive. You could, and very quick, of course. Great cars to drive, and something which, okay, the accident, but the accident was a series of things. And the main thing was, Rod Rushbrook did the most important thing, because I don't know whether I would have come back to racing unless I could have answered the question of why that accident took place. And that was the most thing, because then I was quite confident it wasn't me. And so I was able to sort of go in, because you could, when you're driving, you've got to be totally free of mind and able to do that 10 tenths and 11 tenths when it's required without having any wobble. But no, the little team of Eric, and when you mentioned about the Monza race, I gave a sort of a real push, and I was helped by Mr. Kawamoto and by Nakamura. I said, look, we've got this hellish weight engine in this car. We can't go along giving away 180 pounds all the time. We've got to try and do something. Let's save some money. We were estimating we could save perhaps 80 pounds or so. And I had, before my test, before my crash, I had tested a car, an Indy car, a Lola Indy car at Indianapolis. We were viewed to drive in Indianapolis. And I tested the car, and that car was tested. While I was in hospital in Canada, the Honda agent, Beacom, said, John, who can drive this car? So I said, try Graham Hill. Well, Graham won to Indianapolis with it. And it was that which I had the idea of going to Eric and saying, Eric, can't we use the basis of the Indy car to put this engine in? And so suddenly we put Japan and England together. I think one of the first sort of joint efforts in motorsport. And they sent engineers over, all the machine bits were all made in Japan, and the rest of it all came together, and I think we finished it just a week of going to Monza.
And it won its first race.
And it won its first race.
Absolutely. We all used to call it the Hondola, because
That's right.
although it was a Honda, it was a Lola as well.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Let's have another question. In the green t-shirt right here. Oh, we're over there. Right? Sorry.
Yeah.
John, you've touched on the political situation that existed at Ferrari, in which I think ultimately ended in you leaving the team. But there was a problem, I believe, in late '64 with Mr. Ferrari and his own government, possibly, I don't know. But the Ferrari cars were taken away from their traditional red and raced in the NART colours of North American racing team for a while. What was the story behind that? It's the only time they ever changed the colour of the cars.
Well, the car's back in red again now, because that's how you would have seen it if anybody was here for our event last year when I took it around the circuit on our sort of little demonstration at our karting event. More of that later.
Absolutely.
Ferrari had tried to get, I think, the LM homologated, and he was very upset with the federation, Italian Federation, that he hadn't succeeded. He hadn't done the number, and that they hadn't been able to, shall we say, juggle the figures. And so he got very upset and he said, I'm no longer Italian. we're not Italian anymore. We're an American team. And so he painted the cars blue and white. And we went off to the last two races, which was American Grand Prix and the Mexico, with the cars in blue and white. So,
and then having made his gesture,
a fly needs to be red.
Absolutely. And then by the time the next season started, it was all forgotten. And I think that the LM was actually allowed to race. I mean, he won that little battle.
Yeah.
Right, who wants to ask a question? You're the man with the microphone. You better decide who asks the question.
You've been waiting for some time.
If Honda hadn't approached you, would you have approached them?
Pardon?
If Honda, the people from Honda had approached you about racing, would you have yourself approached Honda?
If Honda hadn't approached you, would you have approached Honda?
Well, I just won the Mexican Grand Prix. I was, it was all sort of dropped on me a bit early. I would have probably gone back and started to think what to do. Yes, I might have done, thinking the same thing, but I might have gone to Colin Chapman and said, Colin, let's forget the past. Yeah, that might have been another thing. I thought about that.
But you always did like a challenge, didn't you? I mean, the challenge of actually taking an inexperienced team, a team that came from the other side of the world, a team that didn't yet really understand Formula One, and you did pick them up, and you won the Italian Grand Prix with them. An awful lot of that wasn't just driving the car; it was making the whole thing work.
Well, it's my life, and I love being sort of involved and working with the people, etc. And what's quite nice is that I still have excellent relationships with everybody I ever drove with, etc. So that's quite good, and it's yes, it was a challenge. Sometimes, if I was looking at it purely from a point of view of John Surtees racing driver, I should have perhaps been more focused and been a bit more like a Senna or a Stewart and just sat my bum in the best car. Perhaps from that point of view, I should have done that. But on the other hand, I probably wouldn't have worked with so many interesting people and had quite a lot of fun doing it.
Well done. That's a great way to put it. Can we have another question?
So, firstly, John, thank you very much for a wonderful evening. And two-part question, a little bit naughty, I know. One from your time at MV Augusta, so whether you've got any scurrilous stories from whether they actually stopped the production lines of the helicopters to build the motorcycles, or anything interesting from that era of your career. And then at the other end of your career, a little bit about an interesting sponsor that you acquired that I think the BBC objected to.
Oh, yes. I knew we were going to get to that.
If I deal with the last one, of course, there was two occasions that I upset them, and one, I suppose, is very topical, because we just had an election. And once, I upset them and they wouldn't televise unless I took it off, when I put on the car, having been requested by Geoffrey Howe, who became the Chancellor of Exchequer but was our MP, and I had my racing team. And at weekends, and going out to Grand Prix at times, the lads would sit at borders, waiting with carnage to be stamped, for hours on end. Virtually a day would be lost travelling to a race in Europe. And travelling was a bit of a nightmare sometimes on borders. And when he came along and said to me, "John, I want you to help me to get more exposure to taking Britain in Europe." He said, it's not political, it's purely a trade arrangement where we were free trade between everybody. And I thought it was a wonderful idea. So I put it on, take Britain in Europe, and they came on and they wanted to stop the Canadian Grand Prix. And so I had to take it off. But no, the small family car.
That's right. Great.
You've got to remember that our success there was that won the Advertising Award of the Year. The Formula One car, single-seater, with the small family Formula One car underneath. Wonderful.
But I think you're going to have to explain to some of the people in the audience whose memories may not go back, what was the product that was written on the side of the car?
The product, I'll get on, the biggest customer of the product was actually the British government. Because the British government tended to send it around the world in aid. And people who have been long-standing in motorsport will remember a name called Barry Gill.
Yes.
Barry Gill, in fact, was in the firm which did the PR for the London Rubber Company. And he organised things, but when they sort of approached us, and this was a project which is called Durex, as such, and nowadays it's gone, but at that time perhaps you had to say it in hushed words. It's a bit controversial. I said, okay, but I'm not going to be involved in things which are distasteful. It's got to be a decent presentation. I don't want sort of the whole thing being dragged down. So he said, no. And I must say, they were wonderful from that point of view. Their presentation and the way they did everything was very good. It did cause a bit of controversy, and when we went to Brands Hatch to start with, they said, no, it's all out. But then we smoothed the waters.
Well, the car raced, but as I remember it, the BBC at the last minute refused to televise it.
That's
because
right.
They said there was advertising for a contraceptive on one of the cars.
That's it. But one of the things was, what was interesting is that Barry came along with a list. And we're talking about 1976.
Okay.
It was 6? Yeah, 6. Barry. Came along with a list. And he said, right, we want to get questions asked in Parliament. Here's a list of the people who will ask questions in Parliament for us.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. Right, we'd like another question, please, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, John, for a smashing evening. Very simple question. What was the spark, the initial spark, which got you interested in motorbikes and engineering?
What was the initial spark that got you interested in motorcycle racing and in engineering?
The first, I suppose, something which really got me a little bit emotionally involved was we were bombed out. My father had been called away by the editor of the motorcycling Graham Walker, the father of Murray Walker, to volunteer to go in to train dispatch riders and organise the workshops at Catterick in Yorkshire. And so he closed his business up, and we were moved into a house just in Shirley, and a bomb dropped in the front garden when my mother was with my sister. She'd just given birth. And so we were evacuated up to Yorkshire by him. And with us went some tea chests, and in those tea chests were all his magazines and things. And one of the top magazines was of the 1939 TT. And there was a picture of a rider called George Meyer, who of course also drove a car. George Meyer winning the 1939 TT, standing on the footrest of a compressor BMW going down Bray Hill with the wheels off the ground. And then I would have been, because we're talking about 5 years old, and it made quite an impression on me. A big enough impression that many years later I searched around, having heard a glimmer, and found that bike in America.
And bought it?
And bought it, restored it, rode it round to New Zealand, Australia, everything else, until BMW came on to me and said, "We haven't got it, we haven't got one. Can you please let us have it?" And I thought, well, if it's going to go anywhere, it'll all go home.
Yeah.
And we had racing programs to finance, so it all fitted in.
It all fitted in.
So I can borrow it back.
Now, I'm getting...
So that's that part of it. So that came on, but I suppose it was largely started by Dad coming home one day after he'd come out of the army and had set up his business one day and saying, "Lad, there's a box for you." And it was another tea box, in fact a couple of them, and it was a Wolf Blackburn Speedway bike in bits. I didn't know what it was. He said, "Put it together, lad, and he would ride it." And so I suppose that's where it all started.
I'm getting signals from Steve, sadly, because we could quite happily sit here until 2 o'clock tomorrow morning, but I could, and I think perhaps you could as well. We're going to run out of time in a moment, but just before I hand back to Steve, I do want, at John's request, to remind everyone about, but maybe you don't even know about it, in which case you're hearing about it for the first time, the 2-hour karting endurance team race, which is going to take place here at Brooklands in just over 6 weeks' time. Now, we're all familiar with the cruel tragedy that befell John and his family in July 2009, which cost the life of Henry, who was set to become one of the brightest motor racing stars of his generation. Now, John masterminded the Henry Surtees Foundation, which has been doing such wonderful work for young people over the past 6 years. And of course, proceeds from this evening will go to the foundation. But among one of the special events which John has created on behalf of the foundation is the Henry Surtees Team Karting Challenge, which is now in its 3rd year. It's organised here at Brooklands with the help of the Brooklands Museum and of Mercedes Benz World. Look at your diaries, it happens on Tuesday, June the 30th, and John tells me there are still a few places left for the 2-hour team race. All you have to do is you have to put together a team of 4 people, and you'll be able to battle it out here on the kart circuit in D-Max Birell karts. Not just that, there'll be a great party here, which is being hosted by Steve Ryder, all the wonderful museum cars and facilities of Mercedes Benz World to enjoy. Bonhams are going to run an auction, and John's very proud of this. In the interval, you'll be able to watch another former world champion, Damon Hill, who will be demonstrating the ex-Jim Clark Tasman Series winning Lotus Climax, Derek Bell in the first Surtees TS7 Formula One car, and John himself doesn't want to be left out, so he is going to demonstrate that car that we've been talking about, which John took to his 2 final victories at Mount Fuji and Imola. It's a special day, it's for a special cause. All you have to do is get together a team of 4 people, and you could be battling for the lead in the 2-hour team challenge. So that's enough from me. I'm going to hand back
I'm
to
just going to say
Steve.
one more word on that.
Yeah, go on, John.
And there's also, if you don't want to compete in it, there's also the fact that you can come along and you can buy tickets to the champagne reception. Champagne Mum, which is, as I told Bernie when he sort of supported us with it, I said, yes, it's going to be drunk, not sprayed. Mum champagne and bowl food, etc. And I say there's going to be an assortment. Damon, of course, is following on from his father having driven for Lotus, and Derek Bell won his only ever World Championship points in a Tier 7. Absolutely. So that's why we invited him, and I'm going to put a couple up and coming youngsters in 2 Formula cars, including a including a sponsored car which was referred to earlier. Sounds interesting. A small family car.
A small family car. Excellent, excellent. John, thank you so much, but I think we're going to let Steve just wind up the evening. But before I hand back to Steve, what an extraordinary hour and a half we've had. Can I have a big hand, ladies and gentlemen?
An additional 350 people that will turn up for the car today. I've done the last 2 years, not driven, but just been there, and it is a spectacular event and well worth going to. And I'd like to say I first met John a year ago at that event, and I very cautiously, timidly went up to him and said, would you give us some time? And to my surprise, he said yes. So a personal thank you, John. We're now going to quickly do the